1955 saw the debut, domination, and withdrawal of Mercedes' new sports racer, the 300 SLR. Derived from the W196 Formula One racer that had won the 1954 and would go on to win the 1955 World Championship, the SLR was intended to do the same for the World Sports Car Championship. The F1-focused 2.5-liter straight-8 engine was enlarged to 3 liters for endurance racing and was capable of sending 310 horsepower to the rear wheels through a 5-speed manual transaxle. The steel tube spaceframe chassis was modified to accommodate a driver and navigator for the long road races like the Mille Miglia and Carrera Panamericana. The magnesium alloy bodywork was extended to fair in the wheels and additional chassis width, and the enormous drum brakes were carried over directly from the W196. The suspension for the new car was fairly conventional, with double wishbones at the front supported by torsion bars, while the rear swing axles were optimized to prevent the car from hiking a wheel during heavy cornering. 9 chassis were constructed, 7 roadsters for the 1955 World Sports Car Championship season, and 2 set aside at Rudolf Uhlenhaut's direction to be converted into coupes, intended to race in that year's Carrera Panamericana, and to serve as test beds for the 1956 version of the race car, and as a future successor to the 300 SL road car. In addition to some further chassis widening over the Roadster, the coupe's bodywork largely resembled the 300 SL, but just a bit more mad. Something akin to a 300 SL Black Series, almost, if AMG had been doing the naming in those days. Gull wing doors were still the means of entry and egress, but of course they were a necessity rather than an aesthetic nod in those days, as the tube spaceframe had remarkably high sills to ensure chassis rigidity, and normal doors would have opened onto the tube frame and, well, looked rather shoddy. Modifications to bring the car to market were never fully detailed, but most likely would not have had to be extensive. We'll get to that a bit more in a moment. The coupe weighed in at a relatively lightweight 1,117 kilos, or 2,463 pounds, although this was substantially weightier than the 901 kilos of the SLR Roadster, and top speed dropped commensurately. Mercedes quotes the top speed of the Roadster as greater than 300 kph, or 186 miles an hour, while the coupe could only achieve around 290. Had it made it to production, this would nevertheless have established it as the fastest road car in the world, taking the crown from its older sibling and, ceteris paribus, a crown it would have held incontrovertibly for almost 15 years, until the Lamborghini Miura hit 288.6 kph, or possibly until the Countach hit 293 in 1982. That's not to say that that's exactly what would have happened, because nothing exists in a vacuum, but we'll leave that as a historical hypothetical. Of course, as we all know, this is actually all historical hypothetical, because none of this came to pass. The 1955 Le Mans 24 Hours remains as probably the darkest day in all of sports car racing, and I would argue in all of motorsport, and Mercedes hurriedly withdrew from all racing activities for 3 decades. Putting a road-going version of the car that had not inadvertently, but that had caused so much death and destruction would have, well, God, been ethically questionable at best, and thus Mercedes declined to develop the car any further. Uhlenhaut, who apparently never actually owned a car, which I find bizarre, took one of the 2 coupes that had been built as his company car and did go on to modify it for road use, which apparently consisted merely of adding mufflers to quiet the enormous side-mounted exhaust, and he used it for commuting for many years. One of the cars, probably thus not Uhlenhaut's, and the second coupe then, was occasionally lent out for motoring tests to journalists, all of whom universally praised the car's performance and road manners, and equally universally bemoaned that it had never been put into serial production, quite understandably. The car that remains on display at the Mercedes Museum was Uhlenhaut's own, while the second car sold for a staggering $142 million in 2022 to a private buyer, almost doubling the previous record for the highest price paid for an automobile. Fortunately, it's the only car in this video so far that has its own Assetto Corsa model, at least that I've been able to find, and it is an absolute joy to drive virtually, which is all that I, or realistically any of us, will ever have the privilege of doing, unfortunately. Still, stunning looking thing, and anytime I talk about the 1955 Le Mans disaster, I just get very sad.